Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the family. Yeah, for the one who are disappointed, I'm gonna tell you it's gonna be in English tonight because we have international guests. But be sure it won't be my bad English. It will be the very good English from our guest. So, welcome to the family. Just to give you in 2 words the big pictures, the family is dedicated to startups and entrepreneurs in France. It's fully private, it's very new, it's been only 1 year. We are 3 co-founders, a young team of 10 people. And this place actually take it like a school. It's a school for entrepreneurs. So every day there are startups who come here and learn. What we try to do is to give them the best knowledge from the startup world. Also because we are fully dedicated to make Paris a startup-friendly environment, we also open the doors to this kind of event. So we've started Growth Hacking Meetup, and very, very quickly, actually, it became the first meetups in France, meaning that in terms of attendees, you are every day more and more on the platform. We have to limit. So bravo, thanks to you. It shows that it's really an important topic. So I want to say thanks to the partners who make it happen also with us, Microsoft Bisparck, Amazon Web Services, and PayPal Developer. Of course, I won't forget France Digital. They fight hard to make also this ecosystem a startup-friendly ecosystem. So 42 School, we might have some of their students tonight. Web School Factory and Presse Citron. I will let actually Hugo present our guest tonight. I wanted to highlight something. So among you, many asked for full-day workshops. We've done it, the first one. It happens last week. And we also had to limit it because in terms of attendees, we wanted to keep it like small to keep the quality. So we open a second day for the growth hackers, or the people who want to learn about growth hacking. It's dedicated for coders, okay? So this is an important information, because otherwise it's not really meaningful. It's not really relevant. So the last workshop was actually something great. We still have people wanting to come, and we, out of all the feedback we get, because we really want to learn and try to make it better every time. Yeah, thank you. I don't know if you can read it actually, but we will send you all the information. But basically, I think the people, and it's not I think, it's the people were happy. Out of all the feedback we've got, it's a beautiful event. It's needed. The only bad feedback I had is the guy who was unhappy not to be on the pictures on Facebook, because we take pictures during the growth hacking workshop. Yeah! Feel free to express yourself also, make it interactive, so our guests feel at ease and comfortable. Raise your hand, say, I disagree, ask question, okay? Feel at home. It's open tonight. And I'm gonna let Hugo. So Hugo is the head of all the meetups. If you have any questions, he's the head also of the workshops. I'm gonna let him introduce our guest tonight. And for any other question, you have my team behind, and we'll be available after during the networking time. Enjoy. Bye bye.
Hey. So yeah, again, sorry for my English. So we've got 2 super cool people tonight coming from the US, and they're actually quite complementary. So they're gonna do quite one presentation with 2 people, but it's gonna be on the same flow. So first we've got John. He's got an interesting story because he started out first. He was 14. By the time he was 18, he already got like a company funded, and he was starting his second one. But he's gonna tell you more about that himself. And he started outside the Silicon Valley, in somewhere where the ecosystem was less developed, totally less developed than here. And he made out to the Silicon Valley, and then he's traveling now around Europe, and it's a pleasure to have him here. And he's going to tell you about growth hacking two-sided marketplaces, because that's what he did for Isaac at his company, and that's going to be the first part, where he's going to tell about growth as a CEO. How do you actually address growth, and the growth team being the CEO and the founder of a company. And then we're going to have Tyler Willis. He was at the team at Branch Out. I don't know, how many of you know Branch Out? How many of you guys have been using Branch Out? Nobody? Like a few ones? Well, it's one of the biggest growth hack in history, so he's going to tell you more about that, and he's been doing a lot of that kind of experiences since. Be sure to ask them as many questions as you want, because this guy, they're really, really deep on growth hacking. So they're going to do a presentation, but then you can ask anything after the presentation or just at the break, so they can give feedback in direct, because they love doing that, they want to help, and they're actually quite good at it. So thank you very much for listening, and let's welcome John first.
Gotta have more energy than that. I'm on jet lag, so I need you guys to like have energy so that I can actually stay awake and not fall asleep on stage. So I want to do just a quick introduction, and as Hugo mentioned, we're going to kind of split up the topic a little bit. So John's going to focus really on the high-level point of view of how do you grow something as a CEO or a founder? How do you think about building a growth team? When do you want to grow your product? What types of strategies are right for growing what types of products? Specifically talking about double-sided marketplaces, which are very, very challenging to grow. As anybody here knows, it's a kind of chicken and egg problem. When you're trying to get buyers and sellers to show up at the same time, it's an incredibly challenging thing to do. So John's going to talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my experiences in building growth teams. So really, if you think about John kind of decides when to hire a head of growth, my role has been predominantly in that head of growth role. So it's kind of walking through what's the strategy and the tactics that work in actually building out a growth team. And I think we'll both have some pretty good actionable insights for you guys to have, and we welcome questions. So if you want to raise your hand during the middle of it, that's fine. You can derail us, feel free. And then we'll also leave plenty of time for questions at the end. So my background, right, like why care who I am and listen to what I have to say. I helped start a company called Involver in 2007. I ran marketing and basically all of our growth there. We were one of the earliest Facebook marketing tool sets, so we helped businesses market on Facebook. We acquired over the course of 4 or 5 years over 1 million small business customers. We used some really interesting ways to acquire those folks. Traditionally, it's been cold call sales and things like that to acquire small businesses. And we actually found ways to acquire them scalably using internet marketing techniques, or growth hacking is the word du jour. And then I used that experience to kind of help basically get to work with people who are much cooler and much smarter than me, helping them put together growth teams. So I worked with Rick at Branch Out on building out their growth team, which in just about 3 months acquired 25 million users on Facebook. It was a pretty ridiculous time, pretty ridiculous story. I'll share what I can from that, and then maybe we can shut off the live stream and I'll give you guys the inside scoop. And then most recently, I've been in an advisory role at Hired.com, which is actually a double-sided marketplace that's focused on recruiting and placing engineers. And we've had a pretty ridiculous growth pattern there as well. It's been a year and a half. We've done over $2 billion in job offers. Again, we're acquiring people using those same techniques of internet marketing. And so I'll walk through some of the things that have worked in my experiences there. If you guys have any direct questions around that, I'm more than happy to kind of dive in deep on whatever you guys want to cover.
Hello, bonjour. Yeah, as Tyler said, we're actually friends. That was a nice coincidence. We've known each other since we started in Silicon Valley, both at about the same time. And then both ended up here today from different paths. But when we found out we were speaking together, that was pretty cool. As he said, we have different hats, kind of founder, CEO, product hat, and head of growth hat. So when we were thinking about how could we make a cohesive talk for you guys, we thought we'd focus on that double-sided marketplace topic. And I'll give you my background on double-sided marketplaces. 3-time founder. Hugo said I started when I was very young. So for about the last 14 years, I've started 3 businesses. The most recent one was called iSocket. It's kind of your typical Silicon Valley tech thing. I've raised over $17 million in top-tier venture capital, have built and defined and won a market. I'll tell you more about what our business does in a little bit, but kind of done that Silicon Valley growth story, both as a company, grown, capitalized, hired, and as a product, we built a marketplace, we grew it, and it's the largest in the world. So I've raised a bunch of money, done all that stuff. About 6 months ago, I was the founder and CEO of the business for the last 6 or 7 years. About 6 months ago, I was ready for a little bit of a break, so I hired a CEO and I gave him the keys to the business. I'm still the chairman, but I've kind of transitioned out of the business that I founded. And now what I've been doing is traveling the world out of a carry-on backpack, just helping startups. I've been all over Europe over the last few months, doing things like this, working with founders, working with incubators. So that's who I am and why I'm here right now, is I'm kind of doing this startup world tour to get out of the valley a little bit and give back and pay it forward and help people. Because as Hugo said, oh, thank you. Thanks. So that's why I'm here, and I genuinely like helping. Like Tyler said, please ask questions. We're here to help. We've got maybe 40 minutes of just some content to get us started, and then we can go wherever you guys want to go from there. Let me tell you a little bit about my company, iSocket, because I think the background and the stories that I'll tell you from it are pretty relevant for growth hacking from especially a double-sided marketplace perspective. And you guys know what I mean when I say double-sided marketplace. It's when you, kind of like an Airbnb, that's a double-sided marketplace. When I talk about growth hacking, that's a term that has been popular the last few years, but basically what it means is how can you grow your business without just dumping money into television commercials or having a bunch of salespeople picking up the phone and calling. People tend to think of growth hacking only as the kind of Airbnb putting their postings on Craigslist kind of thing. And it's a good example, but that's not all it's limited to. Growth hacking is basically just the intersection of marketing and product and strategy, and how can you be intelligent or find out a way for your product to grow. And in double-sided marketplaces, there are some challenges and some actually interesting opportunities. I want to use my company, iSocket, as an example, but I need to give you the context. So we're an ad tech company, we're an advertising company. We didn't start off this way, and that's part of the story, but what we are today is the world's largest marketplace for a certain type of advertising. So we work with premium content publishers. So TechCrunch was my first customer, for example, on the supply side of my marketplace. We work with blogs like TechCrunch, VentureBeat, NextWeb, Mashable, GigaOM, those kinds of things, all the way up through New York Times, CNN, Condé Nast, Microsoft, AOL, Yahoo. So we work with those kinds of premium websites that want to sell advertising. They use our software to manage that process. Where the double-sided marketplace comes in is we then have the buyers of that advertising. So somebody like an auto manufacturer, they want to buy an ad on MSN Autos. We are the pipe in between. So we've got two sides of that market. Pretty straightforward. When I started the business, this industry segment didn't exist. So not only were we making a double-sided marketplace, we created a new market segment, which was very difficult. And we used a growth hacking mindset to not only increase the size of our business, but we had to grow an entire market segment that a lot of people didn't even think would exist. And I'll give you some examples of how we did that. So to start off, you can think about growth hacking differently based on the product. If you make potted plants or chairs, you can use growth hacking to sell them, right? Just in terms of customer acquisition and how do you do that. But when you're thinking about a double-sided marketplace, it's less of a tactic that you use to sell the things that you make and more of something that you build into the product and experience itself. So when I started the company, I knew I wanted it to become a double-sided marketplace, the thing that I just described to you. But as you've heard, I'm sure many times before, there's a chicken and the egg problem, and that's really hard. So one of the first things that we did was figure out how can we avoid the chicken and the egg problem. And the good news is that the way we avoided the chicken and the egg problem was also part of our growth strategy. So this is what we did. We started with blogs like TechCrunch. I mentioned they were our very first customer. Even though we wanted to become a double-sided marketplace, we started off by trying to leverage one side of those two sides. So we basically ignored the demand side, the buy side of our market. And we went to the supply side, the websites, and we said, okay, there's existing business that's already getting done here. The way that people used to do it before our product was very analog. They would email spreadsheets back and forth and use the phone. Very little technology, but the business was happening. So we said, okay, let's go hack our way into that process. And we'll focus on building a tool for one side of our future marketplace, and it'll give that side utility even if they're the only person that uses it. What I mean by that is, if we were starting as a marketplace and we got TechCrunch as our first customer, they would have depended on us to bring demand, to bring advertisers to them. We avoided that problem. We pitched people and said, no, we're not going to bring you demand. We're not a marketplace. We're going to give you a tool that provides utility, and even if you're the only person in the world that uses it, you'll still get value out of it. There's no network effect. In our business, basically what that was is we gave them a utility to deal with the advertising orders that they already had coming to their door, because they were TechCrunch, and this was 2009, and they were at the kind of top of their heyday, and people were calling them all the time saying, I want to do business with you. But it was manual and analog, and they didn't know how to handle it. They needed a tool to do that. So I built that tool. Hey, TechCrunch, here's this tool. You can use it to handle the demand that's already coming and knocking on your door. And that's it. It didn't rely on me being a network effect. And it worked. But then what I did is I gave that tool to more publishers. I got Mashable, and then I got the Cheeseburger Network, and then I got VentureBeat, and started growing from there. But how was that part of our growth strategy? Because the buyers would eventually create an account in our system, and over time, we eventually had a couple hundred, I think we got to about 300 of the supply side, and we had thousands of the demand side that had accounts created, and we could turn on that marketplace. So 2 birds with 1 stone. We avoided the chicken and the egg problem, and it fueled kind of our early growth into becoming a marketplace, because we built up that other side of the marketplace without having to force it. Does that make sense? So around the time I mentioned, once we got to about 300 publishers, we started noticing that advertisers started calling us directly and saying, hey, I noticed that you have TechCrunch and Mashable and GigaOM and VentureBeat, and I work with every one of them, but can you just turn it into kind of a marketplace so that I can buy from all of them at once? And we were kind of waiting for that moment where people would tell us, you're ready to become a marketplace. That happened, we did. We ended up launching a web app that was called buyads.com, and we took all of the suppliers that we had built up and put them into one area and became a double-sided marketplace. But because of the way that we grew, we already had a community ready to present, and we didn't have a chicken and the egg problem. We still were a network effect. We still needed to grow on both sides, but we didn't have that initial chicken and the egg problem. So then once we put that marketplace out there, there was a bunch of different things that we did under the light of growth. Some of them were little kind of tips and tricks and hacks. Some of them were bigger strategic things. An example would be, still under the light of giving one side of your marketplace a tool, we built a tool, we called it order fulfillment. Basically what we did is we went to the websites and we said, look, you might have an advertiser that doesn't want to come through our marketplace. They might want to do business with you over the phone. So we built them kind of a back-end management tool where they could use that as the seller and then eventually bring the advertiser into the equation. Imagine if Airbnb built a tool where people could charge credit cards for family members that were using their house, even though they didn't necessarily go through the Airbnb marketplace, something like that. Another thing that we did was, and this one's kind of simple, we would show and serve the advertisements on a website like TechCrunch, but sometimes there wasn't an ad to show. It's called remnant inventory. So sometimes there would be like a blank space. So instead of a blank space, we would show, it was gray and it said advertise here. Right, it's the equivalent of powered by Hotmail in a free email, and that being a growth cycle. So we did little things like that, whether it was leftover ad inventory, or we would, oh, here's a good one. We would actually spend our marketing dollars as a company on the inventory available in our marketplace, because not only did it fuel some of that growth of this double-sided market, it obviously then acquired customers for us, so another 2 birds, 1 stone. Another cool one, we knew about our target customers, our target cohort. If you think about a website like TechCrunch, they have salespeople. We knew just from experience that a lot of our target customers on the supply side had Google Alerts set up for, like if you were an ad salesperson at TechCrunch, you had a Google alert for TechCrunch advertising. And we knew that about our customers, so we hacked that as a way to grow. I mentioned we got to this point where we opened up this marketplace called buyads.com. What we eventually did is we seeded our marketplace with profiles for websites that we didn't yet have as customers, but we wanted to get. So we actually did the manual work where we actually paid some offshore virtual assistants to build an index of, within certain criteria, what are the websites that we want but don't have. We then created profiles for those websites as best as we could, and we SEO optimized it for certain keywords like that website's name, sell advertising or buy advertising. And on one day, and this was very intentional, there's this one day where we flipped the switch, we took off the no robot block, and we knew that Google would crawl it, and we knew that all these target customers that had Google Alerts set up would get a Google alert for buy advertising on whatever website they worked for, and they would go check it out. And it worked brilliantly, right? So people would go and they'd look at it and they go, oh crap, there's this profile, I might as well claim it and put up my contact information and my pricing information. So that was a growth hack that was pretty straightforward. We knew our customer, we knew a novel way to get to them, and we could do it at scale without having a chicken and the egg problem. I like you. Again, growth hacking sometimes can be as simple as just understanding where there are unexploited or underexploited ways to capture customers. I've talked a little bit about the supply side, like our websites, but what about the demand side, the people that work at ad agencies? They get pitched all day. Like they hate their jobs because I think on average 40 times a day, they get an email from a company like mine that's like, hey, come buy our shit. And we knew that that was very ineffective, but we knew they were all on LinkedIn, and we knew they heavily depended on LinkedIn. So we targeted the keywords for those cohorts, like account manager at a ad agency. But in the ads on LinkedIn, we just, the copy, the words would say something like, do you hate your job and throw up in your mouth a little bit every day? And that's all it said. Now that's just, on the one hand, that's just creative marketing. It was different, it got people's attention, but that falls under this umbrella of growth hacking, and it's not as mysterious as people think it is sometimes, because we just simply exploited a way to reach and acquire customers that hadn't been tapped out yet. And it worked brilliantly, because people would see that and they'd laugh and they'd go, oh, what's that? And they'd click on it, and we got a huge response rate. Or another one would be, I gave a speech at an industry conference, and part of my message to the advertising agencies was, you need to know how your sausage is made, which is an English expression. I don't know if that translates well, but because online advertising is kind of this black box, a lot of them didn't understand how things worked. So my message was, you really need to understand how the sausage is made. But then what we did is we got the attendee list for that conference, and we mailed everybody that went to that conference a package of sausage. And I think there was a URL on it, but it was even like a bit.ly URL, so it didn't even say our name on it, so it's kind of mysterious. So imagine going to a conference, and then a week later you get sausage. And that's kind of weird. It worked brilliantly. On the one hand, creative marketing, but yeah, that's absolutely growth hacking. Oh, some macro things. I mentioned I would give an example of, not only did we have to grow our marketplace, but I'll spare you the details. We created a new industry segment. If anybody here is in online advertising, it's now called programmatic direct or programmatic premium. We created that. And when you're not only trying to build your own business, but you're trying to define and grow an industry segment, there's a lot that goes into that too, and you can growth hack your way into that. So some examples of how that applied to our business. We not only created the API standards for what is now kind of being used across competitors and other companies, we also created an index that we kind of gave to the community. If you're familiar with like the ISDN number for books, something similar but for online advertising, it didn't directly benefit our business, but we felt that we could help growth hack this industry that was still very nascent if we did things that benefited the entire industry while simultaneously created defensive barriers for our business. Because if we set the standard, then we own the standard, and we are the standard. But it's simultaneously it was like a Trojan horse into growing and building and defining this industry. So we did things that appeared like a waste of time from a normal startup perspective, or things that didn't directly benefit us, but they absolutely were an intentional part of a growth strategy. Okay, speaking of that kind of political, did it appear like a normal growth hacking thing? Like I mentioned, I was the founder and CEO of the business, product strategy guy by background, and that's where we thought we would take a little bit kind of different perspectives on this. So I wanted to touch on, if you're in my position, how do you think about growth? I've already made the point that, especially if you're building a double-sided marketplace business, growth isn't just the marketing tricks that you do. It should be a core part of your product, and it should dictate the order of operations of what you build first and how, like how we started with the just one side of the equation and leveraged half of our double-sided marketplace. So if you're in that kind of founder CEO role, especially if you're a founder CEO that's more kind of the product strategy kind of role, this is not something that you just punt away, but then as you're growing your business, you're going to need help of talented guys like Tyler on how do you think about growth, how do you invest in growth. So an example from our business, I've mentioned already this marketplace that we opened called buyads.com. We had multiple different products, or multiple different ways. We had multiple different front doors to our building that customers would come through. And we knew that some of those doors were going to be very kind of sales call oriented. Like, we knew that to get the biggest publishers like CNN and New York Times and those kinds of folks, you had to pick up the phone and call them. You couldn't really growth hack that too much. But when it came to smaller advertisers that we wanted to go to buyads.com, that was very much a growth hacky type of thing. So right off the bat, there are times when you can apply the full suite of growth hacking principles, and sometimes when you just need to know about your product, hey, you know what, I just need to pick up the phone and call people, like the New York Times. So we had this very young product, buyads.com, and we knew that we wanted to treat it like a growth hacky type of thing. In other words, if we had learned that the only way to make that product grow was by having a lot of salespeople pick up the phone and call potential customers, the economics weren't going to work, and we weren't going to continue to invest in that. So we were at this interesting fork in the road. We were saying, okay, we've got this new product. We want to invest in it. We know that we want it to grow via more growth hacky type of things as opposed to salespeople. But should we spend our very limited resources on this? And even if you've raised $17 million, you still have limited resources because you can do other things with them. So having known Tyler, and Tyler being one of the better guys at this, we actually even talked about hiring Tyler. But before we took that step of hiring somebody full-time, what I did was I kind of carved out, I called it the growth team. I took one of our engineers who was more of a front-end engineer. He was much more oriented for this kind of thinking. And I took our marketing guy, the same guy that did the sausages, that did the LinkedIn ads about throwing up in your mouth. And I put them together, and I said, we're gonna abstract you from the normal roadmap. You're gonna be entirely separate from the engineering team. And your guys' goal is to figure out with this new product, can it be growth hacked? Like, before we invested in hiring a hotshot like Tyler, can it even be growth hacked? And I put these two guys on it, and I said, find out. Run experiments, set up the different analytics things, and then all the little tactical things that you do when you're running marketing funnels and acquisition funnels, with the goal of proving to ourselves and some of the skeptics inside the company, because like I had like traditional sales guys that would be like, oh, growth hacking, that's just bullshit. We need to pick up the phone and call people. And we said, no, we're gonna carve this team off to the side. They're not gonna bother anybody else, and we're gonna prove to you guys that it can work, or we're gonna find out that it can't, and we're gonna shut it down. which we needed to do politically because sometimes, like I said, you've got traditional sales guys or the hardcore engineers don't really feel like it's real engineering because it's more kind of implementing Keen or KISS metrics and then that's it. So we kind of carved it out to the side. We ended up finding out that we couldn't make it work in a way that was economically profitable. And we used the growth hacking techniques as a way to validate whether or not we should even invest in that product. And we didn't. We learned that we shouldn't, and we ended up shutting it down. Had we decided that it made sense to invest in that product and invest in developing a growth team for that product, that's when we would hire somebody like Tyler, and that's what he's now going to kind of touch on, like being that guy, building that team, doing that stuff day to day.